Well, good evening. Welcome to New Life Community Church. Thank you, Pastor Dave, for having and hosting us on this evening. Much appreciated, and welcome to each and every one. Boy, good representation here, and just good to have you here this evening. My name is Wes Dinah. I serve on the leadership team for the district, overseeing church services, which is really the stream that's kind of organizing this evening. My colleague Robert Thompson in the corner with the camera there, which I can break. This is not my best side, but you at your own risk.
It's just your other side.
He serves as credential care. Doug Lancaster is our assistant superintendent. He also covers for church ministries. And we have our superintendent and John and his wife Donna. We're glad to have them, and I'll just put it up front. John's here. He's going to end the evening off, so he will address and correct anything that needs to be as we get to the end. No, he will conclude. Let me just give you an oversight. So, and we're just a couple minutes off here, but want to respect your time and kind of the time that we've set, scheduled to go to 9:30. Going to introduce Collin here in a bit. We've got a leadership piece that we're going to present, and I'll give just a couple of sentences of intro. We'll do break, and it might be a little bit difficult, but if you feel the need for caffeine or carbohydrates or whatever that is, sugar, I guess, feel free to get up and go. But we will allow you to stretch for a bit, kind of after Collin's presentation. Then we got a technology piece, and our technology guru is with us. So, man, I'm traveling with younger people these days because I'm very much into reverse mentoring, and technology is one of the reasons. It's called a smartphone, but you need somebody smart to run it too. So, thankful for these young guys. Lou will be here in a bit, and then John is coming to round out the evening, and he'll have a piece on remuneration in that, as well as some closing challenges and thoughts as we've gathered here this evening. This is what we've entitled Building Church Leadership. Just a couple verses before I pray and we get into the evening. In Ephesians chapter 2, the apostle in verse 20 says, having been built on the foundation. Let me start at verse 19. Now therefore you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom the whole building, being fitted together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are being built together for a dwelling place of God in the Spirit. And so just talking of that, using the metaphor of the building, of we're being built together. The church is us. It's not just a building. It is us, but God's doing work, and that's part of the reason we gathered tonight. And then just over in chapter 4, verse 16, a verse that I'm sure is familiar to all of us, from whom the whole body, joined and knit together by what every joint supplies, according to the effective working by which every part does its share, causes growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love. And so that's kind of the reason church health is kind of a major part of what our stream church service is. But what is it? It's hard to measure. What are we measuring? And if you go to your doctor, he'll do the vitals. I had my annual the other day, and they go through the whole, and I hope he'll come back and say I'm healthy, I feel good. But what is church health? And so that's part of the journey. It's not going to be all unpacked here tonight. We're not carrying the burden of omniscience here. This is something we're going to build on. But we want to give you, and as a basis, I just encouraged those that are going to present and Collin here tonight. You may or may not have heard of the author Patrick Lencioni, but he has 6 questions in a book titled The Advantage. First one is, why do we exist? And that goes to purpose. The second, how do we behave? And that speaks to values. The third is, what do we do? And that's mission. Now, those are not where we're going tonight, because that's for you to determine. And I would just encourage you, as a church, as a leadership, to take some time. They might seem simple questions to answer until you actually, just sit down and ask them, and then begin to work through it. But I think it's worthy of the pursuit. But then question 4, how will we succeed? And 5, what's most important? And it's there that I've just encouraged our presenters to focus, so we get into processes, paradigms. Now, I know as Pentecostal people, we're into power and prayer. And so we need to have where the knowledge overlaps. We need the power, we need the prayer, we do. And we're not jettisoning that in the least, but we also, as the men of Issachar, Benjamin, who understood the times and knew what to do. We all interact, we all interface with our world, and so we need to know those things. And so tonight, it's just part of that journey, first through teaching, then through technology, that we want to just begin to equip. And I trust that you'll take one thing away from here tonight, and I think it will have been a success. Let me open us in a word of prayer, and then I'm going to introduce Collin, and we'll get into our teaching element. Father in heaven, thank you for this evening that has brought us together here, and I just thank you for each one that has made the time and taken the time to travel here, to come here, and to be here tonight. And Lord, I thank you for the leadership that is represented in this gathering here, in this church hall, this church basement tonight. And I thank you for their commitment to you, and I thank you for their commitment to the local church, and for all that you are doing in us and through us and among us. We give you praise. And Lord, we just set this time aside tonight to come and learn, and to hear and to receive. And I pray that you will just aid and anoint each one that presents tonight, and may we have ears to hear what you are saying to us, maybe afresh, maybe something we've already heard and know, but maybe just in a new way, and we can take it and okay, an aha moment or whatever it would be. But Lord, we just give ourselves to you. We give this evening to you, and again we thank you for your presence here, and just teach us and instruct us and equip us as we gather here. Have your way. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Collin Pullar is a member of Avonhurst Pentecostal Assembly in the city of Regina. He serves on the board of governors for Horizon College and Seminary in Saskatoon. He works in the business, so he's not credentialed. He's not a pastor, but he's well versed. He has an MBA. He's got other designations there, and God's just using him out there in the corporate world in very key and very pivotal ways, and we're just delighted that he has made the time and taken the time, and I brought him here without feeding him supper, so just pray that he'll but we do have some cheese and cookies over there, so I think we'll be okay. Collin, great to have you, and come and teach us this evening. I'm going to just sneak by.
All right. Well, thanks, Louis. I'm gonna go low tech. I think so. We'll go low tech tonight. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. This all started over a cup of coffee. And I can't remember what the coffee was about, but it went into some other direction very quickly. A few months back, I believe. And while I can't remember the exact nature of why that conversation began, we talked a fair bit about different elements of leadership and strategy and some of the challenges that we face as leaders and those in pastoral ministries and ministry in general understand that, whether you wear the hat of the lead pastor, the hat of the business owner, or CEO or president, or if you're the spouse of somebody in that role, because you're there as well. So we had a couple of conversations around a couple of concepts that I just shared on paper with him, and it's stuff that I often get asked to do for business groups or others. Like Wes said, I've just recently joined the board for Horizon, but also been involved with our own children's school at the Regina Christian School as well, their board for a number of years. And but my background is much more business and also working within government, whether it be federal, provincial, and kind of, I don't know how it happened, but sort of found myself getting into turnaround projects. And we were talking about that on the way in. It's like, yeah, a lot of pastors step into roles and they're in turnaround projects. And one of the first things that we end up having to acknowledge, and if you haven't figured this out yet, and I get a chance to work with a lot of CEOs for right across the whole spectrum of whether small businesses or large businesses, and inevitably the conversation comes up about how isolating their positions are, and that oftentimes you feel very lonely in these spots where maybe externally it looks like everything's cool and everything may be running externally well, but you are very much you're kind of on the bubble all the time. You've always got to be on, and it can be wearing and challenging, not just for you, but particularly people who are supporting you, i.e. your spouse and your children, and you're working on this external all the time. You're always feeding other people, and maybe not properly taking the time to feed yourself, and that becomes a challenge, particularly when we're dealing with more diverse challenges in our communities that we're doing our work in, and where you're ministering in, and so that's an important element to, let's just get it all out there. If you want to be a leader, get used to being lonely, right? There are times when you're making decisions that not everybody enjoys, and and sometimes those are painful. And I see some head nods, but anyone with me on that or understand what I'm saying? Okay. And it is something that one needs to grapple with, regardless if they've been in ministry or if they're working in a similar role outside of it. Key reason is you don't really have a lot of peers that work in the same shop. Remember going to a place to work, and there's 10 of us, we all kind of do the same thing, and we gripe about this guy and gripe about that guy, and the manager, this manager. Next thing you know, you're the manager, and then they're all griping about you. But you might have a couple other managers, whether they're in the same city or not, or the same place you're working at. You had a peer, something that you can say, oh yeah, we're kind of at the same level in the organization. You kind of understand that. And then, something that you think, well, gee, you want to get to, and it's something you feel called to do, and that's lead the shop. And then you're wearing the hat. And if you have a board, whether, if you're either a publicly traded organization, or if you're in a nonprofit organization, or you have a board, and all of a sudden you feel like, you don't even feel like the stuff in the sandwich, like it's maybe stuff that shouldn't be in the sandwich. So, I want folks to understand that that's, if we all acknowledge that we're all at that same level in that, and get used to it, there's hope. And what I'm going to do just this evening, to open is to share two things and a tool. But one, the days of CEO as Superman is dead. Okay? The days of CEO as Superman is dead. Well, whether you're running a church or you're running a two-person popsicle stand, and I'm quoting this right from, actually, did I tell you where it was from? Chamber of Commerce, actually, National Chamber of Commerce. I was reading this article, it's a couple years old, and it resonated with me. And the reason being is we were kind of brought up in a period, we still are, a period where the image of a leader is one who's on a horse by themselves up on the top of a mountain somewhere, and they know what the right things to say, and they always got the tools, and they're the smartest person in the room, And that's kind of been our image, and it's in some cases it's kind of small kingdom image. I call it, at least people I work with on a day-to-day basis, more or less, is like it's a small kingdom attitude, because you're only limited in your own physical abilities. There's a certain scope that you're given tools, and God blesses you with tools, but there's only a certain amount of impact, and carrying all the burden of leadership and having to make every one of the decisions sometimes can start out as being fun, but as your organization grows, or as our responsibilities under the mission that God's given us is, we're to grow as church, or to create disciples, we're to multiply, and you can't do that just with one. You can't take one and multiply one. You need others, and developing people, teaching them, showing them how to do the same thing. It takes time, effort, energy, and most of all, it takes a certain amount of humility to say, I don't know all the answers. CEO Superman is dead. Pastor Superman is dead. And the evidence of it is we see carnage all over the place, where pastors are laid out that have felt the need and urge and the pressures, and maybe that's societal pressures. After a time under they can lose their way, and it ends up in their marriage, or ends up in bad decisions. And following today, I'll actually share an article that sharing actually with Jeremy, the president of the college, and Harvard Business School just recently, a couple of years old, wrote an article called "Why Leaders Lose Their Way." And while it's written from a purely secular perspective, it talks about the reasons, which all focus entirely on some spiritual battles that key leaders who have been, externally, we'd say, man, they're the president of the International Monetary Fund should be on top of the world. One of the most recognized names and admired people in the world would stumble and do some stupid things in a hotel room with a maid, and all of a sudden his whole world falls apart. How did he get there? And we see it over and over again. So I want you to remember that piece. The second thing is, don't grow weary while well doing. Why am I telling you all this stuff before I draw anything on the board? Is because it's important to understand those elements, because when you actually start grinding through some of the stuff I'll just share here, and it's purely around some of the things we got to think about as leaders from a strategic perspective. It's hard work, and sometimes you've got to rip yourself open, or allow yourself to be ripped open. And I'm saying it entirely from personal experience right now, middle of it again, working in a turnaround in a company. And when I met with the board and they invited me to take over the place, I said, well, you realize this thing's a black box. I knew nothing about it. I never met it. I think I met one person who worked at the place, and I met them 2 years prior. I wasn't even sure if they still worked there. It turned out they did. And I said, well, the only way this is going to work, I think, is I'm going to have to completely rely on other people within the organization to help rebuild it. And so it was actually a good thing to have that problem of not having a clue what I was supposed to do when I walked in the first day. And still have a lot of prayer on that. Just asking, oh gosh, Lord, just introduce me to the right person to get me through the day, or at least to the end of the, and then the day is to the week, and show me the right attitude and the right approach, and yeah, maybe I've got a few tools like Wes has said, and that have been helpful, but really at the end of the day, all of this stuff is about people that have their own hang-ups. We're working with people regardless of what kind of business that you're in, and it requires their heart and energy and effort to grow what we're trying to grow. And if we're trying to grow the kingdom, we need their heart, effort, and energy to do that. So I jotted down a couple things that you had said. So can everyone see this? I'm gonna move this over a bit here, and I'll try to pull it to the center of the room here a little bit. And then I'll try not to put my other side, I was gonna say my best side, but my other side over too far. I was gonna show this electronically, but you know what, sometimes it's better drawing stuff. And we do activities in our ministries all the time, whether it's you're a layperson or running a church or running a business or something. We do these activities, but one of the things some of us don't get a lot of exposure to, particularly if we're in, I'll be blunt, I guess, when we're in kind of what people would consider human services end of the business world, right? So, social work, counseling, oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank. Social work, counseling, nursing, those kind of fields, we're not necessarily exposed to the elements that you might find at the other end of the spectrum, some of you might say, well, the hard skills of business, finance, strategy, strategic planning, or if you're on the if you've got a military background. Anyone have a military background by chance? No? Okay. So a lot of the elements that are shared and that you're taught in a military background, we don't necessarily see at the other end of the spectrum, no. So I'm going to say the social and softer skills, and then I'm going to say we're talking about the business or harder. I'm going to flip this over in a second, so just to give you a background on it. If cops are kind of over here and social workers are kind of here, oftentimes people who are in ministry attracted to and drawn it, they really kind of end up on this side. There's a lot of stuff because it's all driven by people, and a lot of people who end up in vocational ministry kind of come from this end, and they are really on a people focus, very sensitive to the needs and growth of individuals, and unfortunately don't always get exposed to the tools of strategy when it comes to, okay, well, how do you grow an organization, or what are things I need to be aware of so that I'm relevant as an organization? So as a strategic, I know you can't see this, Wes, so I apologize. So we're not taking a picture or anything like that, because when we plan, how many actually plan for church growth? Actually plan your how you grow your church from strategically do that. And a lot of us have not been taught if we've gone through sort of leadership in churches. Pastor John?
You strategize, but ultimately you also wing it a bit.
Yeah. and we're pretty good at the tactical side, right? So the winging, the tactic, and I'm going to show you, there's about 4 or 5 key elements that we need to understand. And we get involved in these church activities. And in there we've got things that we operate our church, what are called operations, and we have special projects or special initiatives. Sorry about this fellow here. Projects or initiatives that we get involved with that are, the intent is to raise the value to what our church growth, our organization is about. In terms of strategy, the thing that you were just talking about, there's some elements we need to be sure we understand. We need to understand why we exist. We talk about vision, mission, and value. And say, well, okay, we think we know why we exist. We're here to serve Christ and others, yeah, and we're, you know, if we're here to help create and develop disciples and replant and do these kind of things, there's some elements we need to understand in our own communities, because a lot of times we're seeing things where our church communities, or sometimes we think, well, they're dying, or there's a lack of what's happening with them. And so there's some elements that I point out in business. There's some things you look at. We've got the environment. And when you look in the environment, there's kind of what's happening socially or economically. And this is just very generic, okay? So social economics, what's happening in attitudes of people. We're checking into, are there new trends that we notice? Are there technologies and things that happen in the environment that changes? And I know he's going to talk about technology, but technologies that are out there that are changing things in the environment and what we do in our business. How do those impact our strategy and how we deliver on fulfilling the mission that we've been asked to achieve? So that's one element. The second was, I'll just call it stakeholder preferences have a big impact. Does anyone know what I mean by stakeholder preferences? Pastor Doug, you're late, so you better answer your question for me.
Stakeholder preferences?
Yeah, just who would be a stakeholder?
Well, your members would be.
Okay, you got
Your
members.
tithers.
Yeah, members, tithers. Your board, attenders. Anyone else? Anything else?
Anybody who's investing, I guess that's a business term, but you're investors,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Anybody who's investing time or effort or money or whatever into this, what you're doing.
Yeah. Any other bosses or those kind of things that follow? Superintendents, district superintendents.
My wife.
Your wife? She's got a hole in the box over here. but that has impact on your strategies and what you're doing in your as far as how you form a strategy to meet the needs of your stakeholder environment. The other thing that impacts this, and we see it all the time, there's actually two areas, so I'll draw two boxes at the same time because they're related. One is your resources, and the other one, well, call it organization, but usually more specifically, you talk about your people, some of their skills, but most importantly, what their culture is. Does anyone know what I mean by that? By what their culture is? Not, Louis?
What their culture is?
Yeah.
I would say it's the environment that has been fostered within the group that we're dealing with specifically, and how they feel in regards to, in this process of gaining market share or reaching out in their community, and how vested they are to use their skills and assets to move forward.
Okay. So what they're comfortable with, in part, I'm just going to add to what you say, not change it. Just so comfortable with what they consider a norm or a range of things that they'd be. Okay, so their norm. So, you know, folks who maybe work in different churches or different organizations, you walk in and you can pretty much smell what the norm is sometimes, right? Like you can. Some places are very reserved, and other people they're a little more boisterous, and others you're not really sure what to figure out, right? They're just checking you out, or what the case is. So, and if there's been something of dysfunction, if dysfunction has become a norm in that what? Is that true? Did I hit a spot? Right. And you know, let's face it, there's going to always be a certain level of dysfunctionality. I hope I use the word right. I'm not making some up, but there's always a level of dysfunctionality because we got humans, we're all messed up, right? So I guess that's why we're in business, right? I'm going to step back to the resources, and these are, sometimes people can say that they're one and the same. I tend to separate a little bit. And because some of the resources are sometimes red herrings, whether or not it's a really useful resource or not, right? Resources could be trademarks, could be buildings, other assets. It could be, I don't know, maybe you created a program that's a really, a program. What other things could be resources that you would
Something that's always worked in the past.
always worked? Always worked. And so it's become part of the institution just about, right? So it's one of our tools. It's one of the things, yeah. Okay. So, and the last thing, which is actually, so sometimes you wonder, well, should this really be the first thing? Is, what's your performance metric? You say performance, I'm gonna use the word metric, and then we'll have a quiz. What's my timeline? When was supposed to be done?
9:30.
Seriously. Okay, we're good then. Performance metric, which is actually one of the most difficult things to do in any organization. Because it forces you to ask, again, the question, why are we here? What's our mission and how do we know we're fulfilling it? And it forces you. This is actually the thing when I said, sometimes you rip yourself open because sometimes you realize I'm off base, or I haven't tuned myself in, or I don't have the knowledge to do what I need to do. I can't be Superman. We have a choice. We can either acknowledge we're not going to be Superman, or we just try to force it through because we're going to do what kind of worked in the past for me. Thank you for that, because that's, we end up going back to the things, not necessarily figuring out, are we actually making a difference in the way that we're supposed to be making a difference? Now, some of the metrics that we've often used, just thinking organization work with now, what are some metrics that we're used to following in church? Because they'll be exactly the same.
Attendance.
Attendance.
Buildings, bodies, budgets.
Okay. So if I say butts and seats,
Yep.
that's business talk. Budget. What was the other one?
Buildings.
Buildings. They're easy to count. Cash is easy to count. I got so many buildings, it's worth so much. I got so many people that are showing up. I must be doing something right. I just, I guess numbers are irrelevant, but I just spent $4.5 million trying to correct a problem here last week on where people were getting caught up on those very things. They call them contacts. Same thing. Doesn't matter. Butts and seats, phone calls, whatever. And thinking that we were actually making a difference. And but what's our mission?
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone?
Question.
Right? What is the mission?
Ephesians 4:16. Each one doing its part. Period. I think you read it at the beginning of it.
Yep. What's the stuff that we really feel is valuable? Like, how valuable is a building? Right? I mean, it's a. Okay, this is what I told my folks last week. And Wes just showed up right when I was finishing the executive committee meeting and today and picked me up. So he saved me from my meeting. But there are, in accounting language, anyone here do books? Like have to do books for a church or something like that? Okay. Accounting language, you've got assets, you've got liabilities, you've got a whole bunch of stuff. And it's funny that the thing that we don't count on our balance sheet are human assets. Like, I mean, we got a building, okay, we just talked about that. Well, we might have some cash and other assets. We got some equipment. We've got great sound equipment in our church, right? Sound equipment. Anyone have a church bus or a van? Okay, so we got vehicles. Anything else? External signs of success?
Property.
Property, you got some property. You know what I do with these on my balance sheet every year? Depending on the method, I use straight line depreciation, right? Or I use, I forget the other type of depreciation. I'm not an accountant, but that's what I do anyways. But these things, you depreciate, or you got to maintain. Do you know that people are the only thing that doesn't show up on a balance sheet, but is the only thing that appreciates in time if you invest it? Right? It's the only thing. And so how many of us kind of came up at we're, you know, at different points in our life, we're just a mess. Admit it. Right? Still a mess, I guess. But yet, someone, literally thank God that someone was prepared to invest in me. And someone was willing to walk beside me, and somebody was inexhaustible in their grace. We were listening to it. I like some hip hop stuff, so we were listening to that. I mean, yeah, right? Was literally inexhaustible, and what they poured into me, with the hope that they would get a return on that investment, and that investment in lives is what we've been asked to do. We got to go and create disciples, right? The only way you're going to duplicate yourself is by working and teaching others how to do the same thing, right? And so, you know, my intent wasn't to show every piece of business, but I wanted to take, which was a very simple strategic business concept, if I can, right, and help to bring back to what are we really measuring ourselves on here? And because that's going to drive going back to the question of, okay, well, maybe we need to go back and figure out what our mission is. And is it to build buildings? And it's not a criticism. It's just that, you know, it's one of the tools that we use. It might be an indicator. Or are these things, do we cross these out for a second? And is it about, I'll take it back to the thing I was working with my own organization, was it a depth of relationship? I know you can't read that, but call it patented or something, so you can't copy it easy. But the depth of relationship, in whether it be business relationship or depth of relationship that we have with our body, or the depth of the relationship that they have with Christ. Yeah, it's important to get the width of numbers, to have, you know, that volume, and those things are all important, but so how are we measuring this? It's a bit of and it's a competency that we got to develop, like how we figure that out. What other things could be performance metrics that we need to understand that are hard? They're, you know, this is somewhat of, I don't want to say intangible, but you just can't count it really quick.
Well, when you're talking about people, I come from a farming background, and in some ways it's the same. But I could spend half my time with 1/50th of my herd. When it comes to people, I can spend half my time with 1/50th or 2% of my flock, and the rest of the flock that also needs care isn't getting taken care of. So I have to be careful that I don't spend all my time just sidetracked, but I've got to make sure in leadership that I spread my time. And there's times when people need more, but there's sometimes where there's people that just come and take and come and take.
That's right.
And that's all they're there for. And we have to be careful not to get sidetracked off of that, because it can affect our effectiveness in our ministries.
This isn't really the right place for me to attach, but I'm just going to say priority setting in our activities. This isn't not really a metric, but I actually, and I charge my assistant, who was just not today, with the responsibility to monitor the percentages of my time I'm doing certain things, because I easily get off track. I'll overcommit to things, like I'll put too much time into it because I want to do it right. I want to do it my way, and I ask her to be a second set of eyes, because I need to be sure that we've met some objectives. One, have I helped the rest of the management team be able to do what I'm trying to do? Am I helping them along that journey so that it's not completely dependent upon me as Superman, or trying to be Superman?
Yeah.
And part of those things where you don't know when the line is, right? To say, am I putting too much or not enough, or is this just taxing me, or is there somebody better suited to do this particular piece of work? Because we're not perfect at everything, and we've got 2 or 3 or 4 strengths that are gifts to us, and the other ones are just kind of shreds of wrapping paper on the ground that we try to piece together and try to work with, and so we may need somebody who's got maybe another strength in that area to build it up. So is that something that you got to think about, or we have to think about when we're talking about what we're measuring as far as growth in people? I mean, it actually leads to something else around the depth.
Well, we can do a shotgun approach and try to help everybody like you're talking Superman, or we can invest in key people, equipping the saints for the work of the ministry. And you have a group of people to help with the ministry rather than trying to do it yourself.
Yeah. There's risk in that, by the way, Dave.
Yeah.
There's a lot of risk in that. Right? Like, leadership's lonely. Right? And risk is something that, because we take it personally, and especially in these roles, right? And like, oh man, if I don't do it, I can't know if I have the confidence to let somebody else. How much am I training them? How much am I just directing them to do things? And how much am I letting them grow? But
you'll never get much of a business or a church if you expect to accomplish it all yourself.
Yeah, you'll stop at the famous Peter principle. I'm not sure where Peter principle came into that how it got named that, but the famous, and when I look at a model of equipping saints, and I have a book called Jesus Christ CEO. I remember where I found it. Did anyone seen it before?
Yeah.
And what a great little book. And I think of a guy who didn't spend a whole lot of time kind of in the, starting the company, if you want to call it that. And the first thing he did is he duplicated his efforts, right? The first thing he did is he went and recruited some people and said, whether you like it or not, I'm prepared to teach you to be a leader. And some of them failed, and miserably. Some of them, they hung himself. that'd be bad if I were, CEO. How'd your management team go? Well, yeah, one guy hanged himself, and one guy attempted murder, cut off a guy's ear, right? But, and that was the risk he took. He took imperfect people and said, well, I'll pour into you and I'll try to guide you. And his measurement was something that was, sometimes it's hard for us to, because it's not something we can physically measure all the time, but we can see the effect of. And so we may need to spend some time figuring out, okay, if we're equipping saints, how do we know we got a saint? Right? And we may have to look at some other metrics to find out what else is happening. Are people sharing the word, not just small cell groups, because it's a program that always worked. But, are they reaching out to people? Are they, sometimes you measure how many people are going to, how many people are going to seminary or Bible school, how many people are going into business, but then saying, you know what, I need to get further grounding in the word so I can be, I can be properly grounded and have, the ethical behavior, which is, business ethics is probably the top spoken about business issue in the world today. It's not money, it's ethics. And so I'm not saying I know what the answer is to these ones, but to take the time, and this takes time, and it takes ripping open internally to figure out, are we actually making a connection back to that centerpiece? All of these things, they move. We get a little further away from them sometimes, we get further away from the environment, we get a little closer. And the reason why the arrows are back and forth is that the challenge is we get too far away from these things, we quickly lose our relevance. And the closer that we pay attention to some of these things, what are the people that we have? Can we teach our people? Do we have to break through some things in the norms? What resources do we have in place that we could properly leverage? Maybe you need to dispose of some resources so that you focus them in something in the right place. Are we checking out what's happening with our stakeholders? Are we doing the work in it? Again, this is not easy work. I'm not telling you it's easy work. And what's happening in our environment, right? If kids are using smartphones, writing on these things may not be all that useful. Sometimes it is, but we get too far away from that. We tend to lose what's relevant in people's lives, and everywhere you go, that's what people are asking. It's like, okay, why should this matter to me? Who is this? You didn't listen to another song though, maybe. Who is this guy? Who is this guy Christ that you're talking about? Why should this be important to me? My son's been to 3 countries now, I guess, or something like that, and talking to people, you say a name and they go, okay, Jesus, so what? You go to South America, some places up in the bush, say Jesus, they don't know what you're talking about. Right? Why is this guy relevant? Why should he be relevant in my life? And we risk, if we're too far away from these things, always of losing our relevance and never actually fulfilling some of these things. So that was, I put at the top a strategic process, but it's not really business language, is it? It's just, it's people stuff. I just put that on there because that's what I do when I'm in a business group, because everybody gets attracted by that word. So strategy, right? But this is actually a checklist I go through all the time to find out, and I've asked my management team, are we checking these things? And maybe that's part of it. If you've got a pastoral team, if you've got a group of leaders in your church, that lay people that are working with you, whether you're by yourself, starting off with a 2-person popsicle stand, and it's just the two of you trying to figure out how do we make inroads in the areas that you've been asked to go out and fulfill. So, anyways, I think I'm just about burning the time. Was this helpful for anybody? Okay, that's good. And, you know, I'm not sure what our time's like, so I'm just looking you to track me. And if anyone had any other comments or questions or anything, or just share.
Just one thing, when we were talking about equipping, that I was thinking about, if we're building our church, we won't put trust in other people. But if we're building his church, we will.
Yeah. It's a difference between being, thinking you're the owner versus thinking you're the trustee. Right? It's, you're gonna get X'd out at some point in time. We'll walk across the street, get X'd out. We got an expiry date on us at some point, we're gonna get X'd out. What's the legacy we're supposed to be leaving here? And it may not be X'd out permanently, it might be you got pulled off the field because you broke a leg and you can't get back in the game for a bit. And the game still has to go on, right? We're kind of in this big, call it the big epic game. It's a long game. God's got a long game. It's a big epic story. You know, we're a wisp of time in the whole deal, right? And so we come on the field, play our part. We're going to come off the field at some point, and the game's got to continue. So we got to build our teammates. We got to build our folks, and you know, to win this battle. So, anyways, thank you very much. Again, hope it was helpful to you, and you know, certainly, I think the intent tonight was just to talk at a very high level, not really get into a whole lot of deep teaching or anything like that. And but you know, thanks again for the time.
Thanks very much. Many of us, and I look out and I think I can say that we're formed in big, I call it big bubble Christianity. The Judeo-Christian ethic was the glue that held our society together. And whether you darkened the door of a church or not, you knew what was right, you knew what was wrong. That day is virtually gone. And so if to hear some of this is a little bit disconcerting or even unsettling, I think it's just, I would encourage us, and I've been trying to do it, is to read even the book of Acts. Again, because I think we're closer to the book of Acts today than in the world I grew up in. Because in the first century world, if we ever had, and I think that was maybe an assumption if we made it, a corner on truth. You know, if someone didn't hear you, you just kind of restated it, only you raised your voice. And that was kind of how you witnessed the dialogue. It doesn't work today. I mean, somebody would just say, well, that's good for you to believe. I believe, you know, and so we kind of have this. And so it is a different world. And so if we stay centered in Christ and kind of work through, and let me encourage again, because, and Collin could have taken us much deeper into, but you've got processes. I mean, I learned back in my Stony Mountain Penitentiary days as a chaplain. Inmates have a lot of time. I grew up, I was the resident theologian. I grew up in a centered model of leadership. You came to me, I was the young pastor. I knew it all. Except inmates have a lot more time, and now we have that little thing called Google. If you want to know something, and so it's the changing of dynamics, and yet the truth is still found in Jesus Christ. And so to really go through, why are we here? And Collin brought us to that. We've got to answer that. And then how do we behave? That speaks to values. Core values don't change. Our church just celebrated 50 years. And the core values are still the same. Aspirational values, well, we want to be relevant. We want to be current. So we do that. It's the accidental values. Because they sometimes aren't always positive. Well, if you'll dress like me, or if you'll talk like me, or if you'll have no body piercings or tattoos, then we can, we kind of, but we just got to get back to presenting the gospel. So thanks, Collin, for just being here. And like I say, this is a commitment to develop. Rob Lindeman is going to be presenting in North Battleford next week, and
He's smart.
Well, he
He's
is
really smart.
He's the academic dean at Horizon, but again, it's just to equip and to take the time to process and to seek God, to pray and to fast. God, what are you asking of us? And then when you get that sense through the leadership, because some of this you can go to your people. You know, what are we about? Why do we exist? You can have some good conversation, but as you go up and you know, you get in to the process, that becomes a leadership thing. So be encouraged and take it back and talk up amongst yourself. Take a couple minutes, and if you want to grab, I think there's still coffee. I see some cranberry there, and thank you for providing the refreshments there. Grab some of that, and if you come back in about 5 minutes, we're going to turn it over to Louis for the technology piece, and you will want to hear this is some exciting stuff too. So.